Hello. So I'm back for a lecture. I'm going to read to you and basically myself the ending of this book, To Be a Machine. So I've been wanting to finish this book for a really long time and I haven't because I've been super busy, but now I'm going to finish it and I'm going to write about my thoughts on it on my little blog thing. And I'm also might discuss in this video a little bit my thoughts on the matter. So, yeah, today I just need a little bit of a pick me up because I've been feeling pretty shitty. Um, yeah, just having like stuff going on in my life and yeah, the usual stuff. So, I was hoping to make this video to kind of feel a little less lonely and just spend some time with myself and maybe someone who's watching, which I doubt there's anyone watching. But that's okay. So it's the ending of the book. An hour or so later, we were in the backyard of an empty house on the far outskirts of the city, waiting for a cab to come and take us to our respective hotels. Zoltan and I were drinking the last of the Immortality Bus's booze stash, a brazenly potent vodka whose bottle featured a flashing digital display, a Jetsons-like vision of the future of vodka bottles. I was feeling a little lightheaded from the booze and from the small amount of weed I'd smoked at the party, before remembering I hated smoking weed, and so I climbed down into the yard to take the air. The night was warm and fragrant, and alive with the gentle chirpings of crickets. I like this author because he does spend time kind of explaining, like, describing the environment, like the little details in the environment. And, like, there was a part in the book where he was talking about how, because basically the book is centered on this type of movement called the transhumanist movement, where people really are not down for mortality. They just like are not down to die, so they are very focused on trying to advance technology to the point that we basically become computers. And yeah, so by interviewing all these people for the book, the author was just he was talking about how he like kept thinking of himself more and more like a machine and just like a little pawn in the system, like everything he would do. So like even let's say he went to Walmart and he was buying something, he became like very self-aware about how everything is just like one big system. So, like him buying something at Walmart is giving profit to people above, and it's just like kind of like the upwards transfer of wealth. And so he was also like on the bus, and I guess like as the one of the ways he works as an author is that wherever he is, he's always like taking little notes of like conversation and little details about like the space he's in, so his environment. So he was really like having this moment of like what he was doing that, and he was thinking of himself as just like a machine kind of, taking note of things like like let's say you're a researcher, you're a scientist. Sometimes you do really feel like kind of like a computer, like a robot, just because like you're just kind of following like a method and noting down your environment like very like analytically. So yeah, I just like feel like that's kind of like a cool way if you want to be someone who's like more focused on like the present moment. Something you could do is actually to like just like notice like the tiniest little details. Like if you were going to write a novel, how would you describe your space in an interesting way? You know? So I like that. So the night was, yeah. I stared up at the stars, feeling blatantly out of it. Pleasantly. Blatantly could have worked too. Pleasantly out of it. It was good to be outside, to be in the world, to be a living animal. The more I listened, the more urgent the chirpings of the crickets seemed to become. I remembered then having read something in the news a couple of weeks previously about a cricket infestation in the plains of the southwestern states that had been particularly intense in the area around Austin. The swelling of the insects' numbers had to do with the summer having been unusually cool and unusually wet. Crickets were impelled to mate, apparently, by a cooling of the air, which forewarned them on some primordial level of I don't think you're gonna see my double chin. 1 second. Of their own approaching demise. The sound seemed to be intensifying, and to be coming at once from everywhere and nowhere, to be generated by the night itself. I heard the chirp of Zoltan's phone from across the yard. Our cab driver, calling probably. I breathed in deeply, assimilating the warm and complicated air, the fragrant night. In my tipsy state, it seemed outright implausible that all of this world one day would be beyond my reach, that one day I would die and never again breathe this air, or hear these sounds. Crickets, traffic, words, vibrating phones. The interwoven signals of animals and machines. That makes me tear up a bit. It is sad. Or feel the hopeful surge of alcohol in my blood, the world advancing its uncertain promise. It seemed ludicrous to think that this was it, just this once and never again. I heard the hollow slam of the Immortality's bus door and Zoltan calling my name. Our cab had pulled up at the curb. I took a last look at the looming apparition of the bus, the great brown sarcophagus of the American highway, and was momentarily taken by the facile charm of its standing as a metaphor for life itself. An incomprehensible and futile journey in a vast coffin-shaped recreational vehicle, out of nowhere into some other. I walked towards the street, towards Zoltan and Rowan, deciding to tell them about this life as coffin bus idea, and to tell them that I was glad to have been on this journey for a while, whatever it meant or did not mean. But by the time I got to the car and slid in beside Rowan, Zoltan was already sitting up front, passionately laying out the coordinates of the post-human future to our cab driver, and the moment had passed. A short note on endings and beginnings. It so happened, not long after my time among the transhumanists had come to an end, that I was lying on a hospital gurney and gazing at a large computer screen on which the interior of my body was displayed. I was looking specifically at the fleshy linings of my colon, and I was pleased in a detached sort of way to note its cleanliness. The 24 hours I had endured without food and the barbarously effective series of laxative I'd been prescribed had established my interior surfaces as ready for prime time. I was in a position to note these things with detachment rather than horror because I had just been given a dose of an extremely potent synthetic opiate. Could you turn on your side, please? Towards the screen. Yes. And pull your knees up towards your chest. There we go. I had been told that this dosage would cause me to sleep throughout the colonoscopy, but this was not the case. I felt I could have slept had I wanted to, had I just closed my eyes and allowed myself to drift. But I found that I was not unhappy to be awake. I was looking at the inside of myself on a screen, and I was feeling at peace for the first time in weeks, for the first time since seeing the blood in the toilet bowl, since hearing my doctor say I needed a colonoscopy, since being confronted with the possibility of bowel cancer, the possibility that, far from being midday on the journey of my life, I might in fact be nearing its end. It had been a dark and constricted time, a time of dawn awakenings, dreams of suffocation, a time of mortal disquiet in the bathroom, blood on white ceramic. It had been a time of reaching to switch off the car radio during ads for life insurance, of my wife and me smiling less indulgently at our son's persistent questions about death. I felt no increased attraction towards cryonic suspension, or whole brain emulation, or radical life extension. I felt no greater urge towards becoming a machine, but I was by no means unflinching, either, in the face of my own animal mortality. I flinched constantly. I flinched as though my life depended on it. I felt a good deal less sanguine about this matter of my own mortality than I had on the immortality bus. Rowan had been right, of course. I was guilty of deathism. But on the gurney, at a palliative remove from the whole business of myself, all of that was an abstraction. I was a physical body, regarding itself on a screen, and I was also not a body at all, but a consciousness, or a sensation of consciousness. On the screen, a hooked metal instrument appeared. A small and intimately malevolent thing inside the body that I understood to be mine. A tiny movement, a tearing of flesh. A little blood, a withdrawal. This, I understood, was the biopsy. The phrase meat machine was offered to me from nowhere, as if for inspection. I didn't so much think about it as hold it for a moment, before letting it go. I considered with detachment the detachment of my own considerations. I was thinking clearly for the first time, though what I was doing was scarcely thinking at all. I was, finally and literally, up my own arse. I had chosen this sedation because I feared the discomfort of penetration. But I was glad to be awake now, to be witnessing this merger of self and technology, this dissolution of boundaries. The paradoxical effect of this infiltration was that I felt inviolable, as though nothing could touch me. I felt that I finally understood what it meant, what it might mean to be post-human. In retrospect, it was obviously the drugs, but at the time, it felt like the technology. A few minutes or a few hours later, it was impossible to tell and irrelevant anyway. The gastroenterologist who'd performed the procedure appeared by my side. I was elsewhere now, back in the room where they'd inserted the cannula in the crook of my arm, though I had no memory of being taken there. It was strange, he said, a strange inflammation, but nothing sinister. Diverticular colitis, most likely. No, not cancer then? No, not cancer. He said some more things, the general thrust of which was that I was not dying, not at least in any immediate sense, and then he went away. We're all dying. I closed my eyes and saw again the screen, the inner spaces, the soft and clean interior of the body. Painlessly, the opiate veil was being withdrawn. For a moment there, I had been outside of myself, outside of time. For a moment there, I had been at one with the technology. I lay on my back on the gurney and I looked at the cannula in my arm, one of the two channels through which science had recently entered my body. I slowly clenched and unclenched my hand, listening to the soft click of bones and ligaments in the wrist. Its arcane technology of flexion and torsion. I thought of a question my son had put to my wife and me some days previously, while looking at his own hand. "Why do we have skin?" he had asked, as though coming to sudden awareness of some long-standing absurdity. "So that our skeletons are covered up," my wife had replied. I turned to my side and closed my eyes, and felt a gentle surge of relief at the realization that whatever was going on inside me was not going to kill me, that my skeleton would remain covered up from the foreseeable future, and that the machinery, the substrate, would continue to function, if perhaps a little less efficiently from this point on. I felt the distinction between myself and my body dissolve, like a dream of some impossible suspension. I was coming back to myself, whatever that meant. The problem of death, for this particular animal, in this particular instance, had been solved. At time of writing, Zoltan's campaign was still a going concern. Rowan is still filming, still asking people whether they want to live forever, and if not, why not. At time of writing, no minds have been uploaded, no patients awakened from cryonic suspension or returned to life. No artificial intelligence explosion has taken place. No technological singularity. At time of writing, I regret to say we are all of us still going to die. Among the transhumanists, among their ideas and their fears and their desires, I sometimes found myself thinking that the future, if it came, would vindicate them by forgetting them. I sometimes found myself thinking that the situation of our species might change so totally in the decades and centuries to come that it would no longer be necessary to speak of a merger of humans and technology. That it might, in other words, no longer make sense to speak as though such a distinction existed. And that transhumanists, if they were to be remembered at all, would be thought of as a historical curiosity, as a group of people who spoke, out of their time, in their feverish way, of what was in fact to come. I could tell you that I have seen this future, that I bear news of some great convergence or dissolution that awaits us. But it is only true in the end to say that I have seen the present, and the present is strange enough to be getting along with, filled with strange people, strange ideas, strange machines. And even this present is not knowable or graspable, but it can at least be witnessed, glimpsed in brief flashes before it's gone. And it's a futuristic place, the present, very much like the past. Or at least it was at the time I encountered it, which is already receding into oblivion, into memory. What I came to feel in the end is that there is no such thing as the future, or that it exists as a hallucinatory likeness to the present, a comforting fairy tale or a terrifying horror story that we tell ourselves in order to justify or condemn the world we currently live in, the world that has been made around us out of our desires, in spite of our better judgment. I am not now, nor have I ever been, a transhumanist. I am certain I would not want to live in their future, but I am not always certain I don't live in their present. What I mean to say is that I am part machine, encoded in the world, encrypted in its strange and irresistible signals. I look at my hands as they type, their hardware of bone and flesh, and I look at the image of these words as they appear on a screen, my screen, a feeding back loop of input and output, an algorithmic pattern of signal and transmission, the data, the code, the communication. I am remembering now a question that Marlo Weber asked me on my last night in Pittsburgh, down in the basement, with its mingled aromas of caramel vape smoke and sweat and burnt silicon. He said, "What if we're already living in the singularity?" And as he said this, I remember he picked up his smartphone and weighed it in his hand with rhetorical intent, flipping it, catching it. He was talking about the phone, I knew, but also all that it was connected to, the machines, the systems, the information, the unknowable vastness of the human world. What if it's already started, he said. It was a good question. I told him I'd have to think about it. Did I actually finish the book? I finished the book. It's been so long.